Hello, everyone, and welcome to PCI Webinars. Today's webinar, So You're the One in Charge of Volunteers, with Maggie Rose. Maggie is a librarian at the Twinsburg Public Library in Ohio. She coordinates the library book displays and is responsible for the audiobook and board games collections. Maggie also teaches computer classes and sits on the Reference and Information Services Division and Adult Services Division Action Consoles for the Ohio Library Council. Maggie started work in libraries in the 5th grade as a shelver and volunteer in her school library. As a teen, she started shelving in her local public library and has held many positions since. Maggie graduated summa cum laude from the University of Akron with a BA in English and minor in Classical Studies. She received her MLIS from Kent State and has been working as a librarian for 6 years. More than that now, I bet. Maggie loves gardening, camping, and her boisterous family, which consists of a spouse, a boy, a girl, a dog, 5 cats, and 9 chickens. Coming to you now from Northern Ohio, it's Maggie Rose.
Well, hello, everyone. I hope y'all can hear me okay. I do need to update my biography. I have 7 cats now, as they tend to multiply, and we are down to only 8 chickens. But I still have the spouse, the boy, the girl, and the dog. So yes, I have been working in libraries with my MLIS for about 8 years now. So yeah, I think I need to update that biography. But we're all here for the reason that we want to kind of learn about being in charge of volunteers. And there's a lot. Housekeeping. Sorry, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Please download. It's the first one in that box in the lower right-hand corner. So you're the one in charge of volunteers. That is the slides for this program. Definitely download this. Save it to your trainings folder on your computer, because there are links included in the presentation that are going to be helpful to you. The second download that I've provided is an onboarding checklist that I wrote for our home delivery volunteers at my library, and I will talk more about that later. If you have questions during my presentation, if I'm talking, I want you to write that question in the discussion box so everyone can see it. I do keep an eye on the discussion, on the chat. And I want to make sure that I address all of your questions, all of your information needs while we are in this virtual space together today. So definitely pop in your questions as they come to you. So you are the one in charge of volunteers. Well, how did you get there? Not all of us kind of wanted to be in charge of volunteers. Not all of us thought that we could be in charge of volunteers. And some of us maybe applied for the position because we have an inclination. So it could have been like tacked onto your job description in that wonderful phrase, and other duties as assigned. So we're going to talk about, why we're here. Did you inherit the job? Did you want to do this? Was it something that your library system wanted to start up and you volunteered for it? And, do volunteers locate you? Do they come up to you and say, I want to do something for the library? Let me know. Yeah, Jessica, I also inherited my job being in charge of our home delivery, in charge of our home delivery volunteers, being in charge of the whole home delivery service program. It's something that I inherited, and that's great. And I learned a lot real quick about it. So regardless of how you got the job, I welcome you. I welcome you. We're all here. We're all here together, and we're going to talk about using volunteers to promote the library's missions and goals, because that is the reason why we're all working. That is our ultimate goal, is to promote what the library does for the community, and we can use volunteers to do that. We're going to talk about identifying service areas for volunteers. Seeing where we can use our volunteers to enhance our services or expand our services for our community. We're going to talk about creating, if you don't already have one in place, and maintaining a volunteer program. We're going to talk about communication, and I use the phrase up and down the ladder, and I hate that phrase. I want to say up and down, left and right, inside, outside, every which way communication. And we're going to talk about working with our volunteers with respect and gratitude, because they are giving us their time. They are doing this for us out of their own good nature, and we need to respect that and be grateful for it. So the first things first, promoting our library's mission, goals, services, and programming. So this is, like I said, this is the most important thing. If it wasn't good for libraries, we wouldn't be doing it. We wouldn't be working in libraries if we didn't love libraries and their goals, services, and mission, then we wouldn't be working in libraries. So why are volunteers important for libraries? Well, we can use them to add new or to expand our services. For example, the home delivery program, it's not something that we can have staff do. We can't have the staff leave the building at regular hours to go and deliver books to patrons who cannot leave their homes. So we use volunteers to deliver the books so that we can keep staff in the building where we need them. We can use volunteers to help relieve staff. Oh my gosh, there's this huge weeding project going on. I just inherited the care of this collection, and the previous person in charge of this collection was really a hoarder and didn't want to get rid of anything. Oh my gosh, I need help weeding. And that's where you can use a volunteer to help relieve your staff of these onus responsibilities. We can use volunteers to create and start embedded services or to carry them on. If you have a community within your community, you could have a story time outside of the library, inside that community, within a community, and a volunteer could do it. So there you are, expanding your services, and you're embedding the library in this community within your greater community. You can utilize all your resources. Volunteers are a community resource, and we need to use all of our resources. Libraries have never been adequately funded or adequately staffed. There's always more we want to do. There's always new projects, there's always new ideas, and we can bring in volunteers from our community to help us accomplish those missions, those goals, and in those services. So when we go to identify services for volunteer work, as we're looking around at what our teammates are doing, at what our colleagues are doing, we need to kind of say, well, is this something that we can have a volunteer do? You want to be careful when figuring out what a volunteer can do versus what a paid employee will do. You don't want to replace staff with unpaid volunteers. You want to relieve your team of their basic duties so that they can concentrate on more advanced projects, so that they can do the things that make their hearts sing. Volunteers can help relieve the fatigue of the daily grind working in a library. So they're a key role to helping the whole work as a team. And so thinking about areas where you may be able to expand and have your volunteers help, first things first is summer reading club. Now I see we have a waiting list of teens who needed service hours, and I volunteered. Great. Teens are great for the summer reading club. They're enthusiastic and they have the energy at a time when a lot of librarians are drained because summer reading club is one of the busiest times of the year for us. And so bringing your teens in to help distribute prizes or to help keep track or to help clean up after a program, bringing your teens in during the summer reading club is a great way to use them to get their service hours. Also, if you have people in your community that are willing to lead a book club, you can say, hey, book club, look what the library can do for you. We can make sure that all of your members get a hold of the book and they don't have to buy it. But if you have your book club here, we can make you free copies of the materials that you're distributing, but you have to lead the book club. And you can have a volunteer who leads a book club for you, and then boom, you have another regular program, and it's at no staff cost to you. It's not going to take up any of your time. So leading a book club, if you have specific skills, if you have a person that has a specific skill in your community, they can put on a skill seminar for you. This worked out really well for me one time. We had a local man who was a woodworker, and he was also a bicyclist, and he built a wooden bike out of wood, and he had this wonderful presentation of how he did this, and it was an excellent seminar, really well attended, and zero cost to the library and zero cost staff time. It was great. So like looking in your community to even find a volunteer to put on a seminar is great. You can have volunteers help you with your weeding. In some cases, you can have them help you with your shelving. You can have them make home deliveries. Digitization is another kind of, it's not new anymore, but digitizing our materials to get online is a mind-numbing, drudgery kind of task. It's very repetitive. And if you have a teen who has an inclination and handiness with software and computers, you can put them on your digitization team and start digitizing your archives. Computer labs, again, this is a great way to use your teens or even to use the people in your community who are just tech savvy. You can have them set in your computer lab, and they can help your patrons in your computer lab log into their email or download something or print something, and this frees up your staff time. Tech coaching, again, if you have a tech literate teen or adult, you can have them train people on how to download apps, how to use their e-readers, that kind of things. And the community story times that I mentioned earlier, the embedded services. This is not a complete list. If you have ideas that I haven't mentioned here that you would like to share with us on where you can expand your library services, go ahead and type those into the chat box. Thanks, Chrissy. I'm really excited to see what Chrissy's going to say. So while she's typing, Marcus is going to say something too. So while they're typing, okay, so virtual options for volunteers. Okay, Chrissy, if you have a surfeit of materials that have been digitized and they need cleaned up and they need formatted and they need uploaded, you could have your volunteers do that. It's all digital. And then there's virtual story times that you could ask your volunteers to do. You can ask your volunteers to present virtual programs. I mean, they can write a webinar on any topic, and as long as it aligns with your library's mission, policy, and goals, you can distribute that via the library. Okay, and then Chrissy says we're not allowed to have volunteers in the building right now. Okay, and we're going to address this at this moment. I did not consider COVID-19 when I wrote this webinar. However, it has been brought to my attention that some volunteers have been kind of banished from the spaces where they volunteer. Whether you volunteer at a hospital or whether you volunteer at a library, sometimes you just cannot have those volunteers in the building right now. Some ways around that are those virtual opportunities for your volunteers, or handing them their work through the drive-through window if you have it, or distributing work for them for curbside service if you have it. So, if it's all about safety, and we have our volunteers and we want to use our volunteers, but we can't put them in danger, and that's the main thing, is safety, safety, safety. So right now, at this moment, it makes it really difficult for volunteers to come in, but that's COVID-19 for you. Okay, Marcus wants to know if my organization provides insurance for the volunteers working without staff in the community. That would be an administrative question. I know that with my home delivery volunteers, I am the coordinator of our home delivery volunteers, that we require them to have their own auto insurance because they are driving back and forth. We also let them know that they should not do anything that they are not comfortable with, because if something happens to them while they're out in the world, we, the library, cannot be responsible for that. And I hope that answers your question, Marcus. It kind of sounds like my organization does not provide insurance for our home delivery volunteers, but there may be some other volunteers that work within my organization that I'm not aware of that do have some sort of coverage by the library. Okay, Christy says that they have adult volunteers, but not teen volunteers. And the problem is getting them to come in to volunteer because of the pandemic. Oh, okay, Marcus says, I'm thinking if they hit someone else or are sued, there is a big issue. That would be on their auto insurance, which they are required to provide a copy of to the library before we let them go out on library business. So they would be covered under their own auto insurance because it's not a paid position. On Christy's, okay, back to Christy's question. Okay, getting people to volunteer during the pandemic. I mean, we're going to have to be a little bit more creative. We've all been creative so often. I wouldn't say have your volunteers, I wouldn't say give them access to your social media feeds, but I would ask them to participate in social media challenges and tag the library. We had a wonderfully successful recreate your favorite book cover and take a picture of yourself doing that. If you can get your volunteers from home to take a picture of themselves recreating their favorite book cover, that's going to help boost your library's outreach virtually. Okay. Glenn wants to know who is responsible for materials that may be damaged during delivery. Well, the library usually kind of eats that up because our home delivery service is specifically for clients who are termed homebound. And so they don't have an adult child that can take care of them. They don't have access to the senior bus to get to the library. And they're usually generally either older senior citizens that are pretty sick. And so we kind of just let them go. We had one lady, she was so upset that she had borrowed a magazine and then there was an accident and she returned the magazine after the accident, and we didn't want the magazine back. We said, it's okay, you just keep that magazine. But she returned it despite having had an accident with it. So, I mean, we're lucky that our services don't get taken advantage of. Okay, so I hope I've addressed, oh, thanks, Glenn. I hope I've addressed your questions so far. This was a good time to stop and talk about this. I hope I've addressed your questions so far when it comes to virtual volunteering, because right now a lot of volunteers are not able to come to our buildings right now when it comes to virtual volunteering. Just try to involve them as much as you can with tasks related to the library in a virtual space. All right. So creating a volunteer program. When we go to set it up, the most important thing is to communicate clearly the goals and expectations, expected outcomes to everyone. So what you want to do is, first things first, you have to get administration to back you up. You're gonna write a plan proposal, you're gonna write goal proposals, you're gonna write mission proposals, and then you're gonna talk to administration and have them go over possible ethical issues, if you have a library union, how that's going to work for you, whether or not you're going to do background checks on all volunteers, some volunteers, or no volunteers. And this is something that's really going to depend on your very specific situation, your locality, what services you're going to be implementing, and what kind of volunteers you're going to be hiring. You want to make sure that you outline the benefits of your volunteer program. For example, you're going to free up staff to work on other projects. You're going to be able to expand or start new services. And so bring all of this to the table when you meet with your supervisor or the administration team when you're setting up a volunteer program. If you don't already have plan, goals, missions written down for your volunteer program, it's never too late. Go ahead and make sure that you have that document in place, because it's also a safety net. When someone says, well, why doesn't your volunteer program do this? And you can say, well, I'm so sorry, it's not part of our plan, goals, mission statement. So getting that document approved by administration can help you focus your services where they need to be and outline what exactly it is that you can do with your volunteer program. The next thing you want to do after you've got administrative backing you up is you want to get your team, your staff, your coworkers, your colleagues, you want to get them on board with you. You don't want your team, your colleagues, your staff, your coworkers, you don't want them to think that these volunteers are going to come in and take their jobs. What you want to do is say, hey, we're going to have some volunteers come in, they're going to give us some help, and they're going to free you up to work on the projects that you really want to work on. And so what you want to do is kind of ask for volunteers within your own staff, within your own team, within your own colleagues and coworkers. If you're in charge of this volunteer program, you want to say, hey, look, Dwight, do you want to be in charge of the volunteers who work on this program? Or you can say, hey, Karen, do you want to be the point person for this volunteer when they come in? You can encourage mentorship opportunities, especially when it comes to teams, by pairing the right people together. And then after you have the people identified on your team, you can involve the whole library in this. Any staff member in your library can be the point person. Any staff member in your library can be the contact for a volunteer, kind of in the mentorship role. After you have identified and got your team on board, so you have the administration on board, you've got your staff, your coworkers, your colleagues on board, then you're going to set up an interview and a vetting process for the volunteers, and you are going to create the most descriptive volunteer position descriptions. You're going to outline the duties that you want these volunteers to do, the qualifications that are required, and the expectations, especially expectations of time. Are they committing to a 1-year project? Are they committing to 1 hour a week? Are they committing to 5 hours a week? They need to know what they're committing to so that they come back. Okay, so we have our volunteer program set up. We have administration buy-in. We have our coworkers, colleagues, staff, and teammates buy-in. And we have our volunteer position descriptions kind of written up, kind of an idea of what we want them to do. And we've identified the areas where we want them to work. So how do we find our volunteers? My library has had pretty good success with social media and our local newspapers. Social media is great because people can share it, and right now, Facebook is our strongest social media because of the demographics of where my library is located and what the demographics of Facebook users are. They match up really well. So find out who your demographic is and try to find them where they are. If they're on social media, if they only read local newspapers. If your demographic is high schools, you can ask high schools to put up a flyer or make an announcement. Make sure you provide the contact name and phone number for the specific staff person at the library who's going to be handling these high school volunteers. You can also do, if you have a local college, a local community college, or a local university, you can contact them and say, hey, do you have a work-study program? And we could be a location where your college students work. Now, I used to work in a library where this worked out really well. There was a local college, and the students that were in the work-study program could select the library as a place for them to work. And they would come and they would man the computer lab, or they would help us weed, or they would help us put on programs. And it was also a great kind of mentorship program. One of our volunteers actually went on to become a librarian, and we were so proud of her. You can find volunteers within the Friends group of the library. Not all Friends of the library are volunteers, but most volunteers are Friends of the library. So you'll find that if you need volunteers for something, you can ask the president of your Friends to say, hey, would you put out, would you announce this at the next meeting that we're looking for volunteers for this project? Don't forget your library foundation. If you have a library foundation that supports your library, same thing. You can ask them at your next meeting, could you please put out a call for volunteers for us? And then don't forget community organization partnerships. So we created at my current library a program with our local historical society. They needed space to put on their programs, and we needed programs, so they had their presenters come into the library and do their programs here, and we opened them up to the public, and it was kind of a no-brainer. One of those things that they need space, they have a program, we have space, we need a program, it just fits together. In addition to that, our local historical society was really close-knit with our gardening club. And the gardening club actually has a plot at our library. And when it came to our big digitization project, the gardening club and the historical society, members from both groups, volunteered for us. It was really exciting. So you can find volunteers in just about any interaction that you may have. So when it comes to the recruiting process, you want to make sure that your job description is very, very detailed. And you're going to do the job description, you're going to post that wherever you are recruiting volunteers from. If you are recruiting volunteers online through social media, you're going to want to put your job description there. And after that, you're going to ask your prospective volunteers to fill out an application. And you want to get as much information as possible from this application, because you're going to find out why they want to volunteer, how much time they have to volunteer, and what their inclinations are, whether they want to work in, say, home delivery service, whether they want to work on a digitization project, rather they just want to unbox new books. That's something that we need to know so that we can find the right fit for our volunteers. If we have a volunteer who's not in the right seat on the bus, then it's not going to work out. I love the whole seat on the bus analogy. Using the application, interview, and job description process will help you. You're driving a bus. The bus is your mission and goals. If you have people on the right seats on the bus, your bus is going to go smoothly. If you do not have people on the right seats on your bus, things are going to get jumbled up. And for more about learning about how the bus works, I definitely recommend Good to Great by Jim Collins. I read it in college. I forget which one. I read it in school and it changed my mind. So make sure you get your people in the right places and use your application, your interview, and your job description to do this. Volunteer training, you're going to want to train your volunteers to know what to do, especially if it's a if this then that situation, and never give away personal patron information. And are your volunteers allowed to make book recommendations? You want to write all of this down in a volunteer manual. And then also consider your volunteer rewards and gratitude. There are so many different ways to show gratitude. Tiny acknowledgments that will make your volunteers feel like they are part of the group. So your job description that you are going to use, you're going to publish it in the newspaper or on your library's website. You're going to give it to the Friends of the Library. This is the job description, the call for volunteers. It must and should always be approved by either your supervisor or administration, because it's going to become a public document. And this document is going to outline the responsibilities that this person is going to be taking on, the qualifications requested, and then the time and the duration of the commitment and expectations. And then you want to have to always include the contact information for whichever one of your teammates is going to be the point person for this specific volunteer group. Okay, you guys with me so far? All right. The volunteer application. So after they've seen the job description and they've got their, they're like, oh, I can do that. I want to do that. You want to have their contact information on their volunteer application. You want to know why they're applying for the volunteer, what position they want to do. What are their interests and their skills? Do they just love mystery fiction? Maybe they ought to lead a book club. What is their education or work history? If they were, if they worked in like employment services, maybe we can have them volunteer to be, like a job coach or a resume coach. Are we going to require a background check, driver's license, and insurance card? In the case of my home delivery volunteers, we require all three. What is their availability schedule? Are they available on mornings or alternate mornings and evenings? Are they available on weekends? How much time can they commit to this project? And then we're going to need references. Now this is mainly for your adult regular volunteers. Your teens that come in for your summer reading programs or your digitization projects. We're not going to do background checks on teens because then we would need parents' permission. And I'm not even sure that's legal. If anyone knows if it is or not, go ahead and let us know in the chat. But when it comes to teens, their application is going to be less formal because they're going to come in during summer reading time. They're coming in to get their hours done. And they're a teen and they're a minor, and there are specific jobs that they are qualified for, and then specific other jobs that adults are qualified for. So you want to make sure that you've got, different ones, different applications for your different situations. My library has the children's department handles all of the children volunteers. Anyone under 18, they volunteer in the children's department. Anyone 18 and over volunteers in the circulation and adult services department. So however your library, however your administration, library board, supervisors, however they decide to set that up, you can still have a volunteer application for your teens. It's just probably not going to include a background check, driver's license, and insurance card. Okay. So you have put out the call for your volunteers, and you have put out the call with the job description, and you've got information, you've got volunteers applying with the application. Now you're actually going to do on Jessica says, depends on the age. In her county, teens are 18, but we're still in high school, didn't need to be an adult volunteer background check. But younger, they did not need a background. Okay, so Jessica, I think, is saying, if they were in high school, that even if they were 18, they didn't need a background check. Yep. Okay, great. So yeah, and that's probably the case in a lot of places. High school students and younger, no background check, and because you're not going to give them like a home delivery job. You're going to keep them in the library working with your summer reading club or working on your digitizations project. It's all about, what's the right fit for the specific volunteer. And age plays a factor in that when it comes to the type of tasks we can give them. So you've got your volunteers. They filled out the application. You are going to do an interview. And the interview can be super relaxed. The interview can be, if it's a teen, they can come up to the desk while you're working on desk, and you can just chat with them. And then you can find out whether or not they're going to be a good fit. You want to have, if you're doing a more formal interview for, say, a home delivery volunteer, someone who's going to be either selecting books for your home delivery clients or delivering books, then it's a good idea to have yourself, if you're in charge of this program, and then your second point person. Because if you're sick on a delivery day, you're going to need someone who knows how to do what you're doing. So it's good to have a second. And then both of you can just sit down with the prospective volunteer and kind of talk about it. Offer them some coffee, find out what they like to read. And then, are they a good fit? Why do they want to volunteer? I actually scared away a volunteer with an interview. I wanted someone to take the responsibility of coordinating my high school volunteers for my digitization project. I wanted someone to kind of supervise their work and organize the files that they digitized and kind of do a quality checks on them. And I volunteered a young man for this, and he never came back. So I'm glad that we didn't go through the process of getting him started up and running and depending on him only to have him leave. Chrissy wants to know what I mean by digitizing. So my library has a local history room. A lot of local libraries have local history rooms. And within our local history room, we have the library's history. And our library goes back to the 1800s. And so we have like binders and binders and binders of library stuff, acquisition lists, records of like programs and stuff, and then all the newspaper clippings that the library has been mentioned in. And so we are working on a massive project where we are digitizing these materials. We're scanning them. And then we are cleaning up the files, formatting them according to standards, and then uploading them to a website so that we can spread them out to the world. And Chrissy says that she's done some of that for her historical photos for her county, and that they have a Heritage Quest collection. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Chrissy. We're having volunteers do this for us because we just don't have the staff time to start on this project, something that hasn't been done before, but it's something that needs done, but we don't have anyone to do it. So that's another way that you can use volunteers. So after you've decided they've been a good fit, you're going to do training with your volunteers. I've included an onboarding checklist for our home delivery volunteers. It's that second file in the lower left-hand corner. And then you need to decide, and you can talk with admins, your supervisor, your library board about this. Are you going to give some volunteers, depending on their position, are they going to get library keys? Are they going to get library badges? If they don't have staff badges, are you going to give them special volunteer badges? Where are they going to be able to access which spaces in the library? Are they going to be allowed in the circ workroom? Are they going to be allowed in shipping? Are they going to be allowed in the reference office? Are they going to be allowed in the staff room? Those are all things you have to consider with each and every volunteer position, because not one rule is going to fit all situations. You want to give all of your volunteers, this is a rule that does fit all situations, all of your volunteers a tour of the library and to meet and greet all of your colleagues, teammates, co-workers, and staff, because you want to make them feel like this is part of a team. The meet and greet is part of acknowledging them and saying thank you and that they mean something to your team. You want to show them where they're going to be working and what tools they have access to, how to find those tools, especially if they're going to be using a computer, they're going to need to know a login. And if you don't have the ability to get them their own login, you might just ask your IT to create a general volunteer login. And then workspace and tools, it's really important because your volunteers need to have kind of an ownership of where they're going to be working and the work they're working on. And then you're going to write a volunteer manual. You're going to write this actually before the training. But a volunteer manual is where you are going to cover all of the situations that could possibly happen. Volunteer manual. What to do if the library is closed? Who do you call? What to do if you're sick? Who do you call? What to do if a patron asks you for this, that, and other. And it doesn't have to be as formal as your staff manual. I would actually recommend not formal, but a list, guidelines, best practices. Do not give out patron private information. Do not tell library trade secrets. If your volunteer sees dust bunnies under a book cart in the circ workroom in that corner that no one uses, you don't want them to tell their friends that the library's dirty. And that's a trade secret, so you can ask them, please don't do that. Most importantly, that you are going to have in your volunteer manual are your sign-in sheets. Your sign-in sheets are going to include statistics. Statistics make libraries look good. A lot of libraries depend on good statistics to earn good funding from their city, their county, their state, and then in some cases, the federal government. So you want to build statistics. How many volunteers worked for your library this month? How many volunteer hours were put in this year? What projects are volunteers working on? All of these can be collected in their sign-in sheets, and that you can turn those statistics in at the end of the month. In your volunteer manual, you want to make sure that you have those clear conduct expectations and why. Don't talk about the dust bunnies. Don't talk about patron privacy. And then, you want to ask them to, maintain good hygiene because they're representing the library as a volunteer, that kind of thing. So, moving on to volunteer recognition. I love my library volunteers. I want to hug them sometimes, but especially now that is not going to happen. So unpaid labor is not free. You do have to give your volunteers something, even if it is just recognition. You can award them staff perks. Say, someone brought in a fresh baked banana bread. It's in the staff room. Why don't you go get a slice? Little staff perk. Or there's some donuts left over from this morning's meeting. They're in the staff room. Go get one of those. You can hold recognition events for them. Like a volunteer breakfast that we have at my library. You can invite them if there's a big staff dinner. They may be included in that. Andrew says, yes, thank them all the time. Every time you see them, every time they come in, say, thank you so much for coming. Ask them how they're doing. And then make sure that everyone on your staff knows who they are, because Chrissy says her volunteer luncheon was canceled this year. Oh, that's so sad. Yep. Christy, hers too. Yeah, birthday cards. Birthday cards, thank you notes. Those are really good things to give to your volunteers. And then ARCs. So an ARC is an advanced reader's copy. Anyone out there, you can raise your hand. Let's see how many are still awake after I've been talking for 40 minutes. Let's see. Raise your hand if you know what an advanced reader's copy is, and if you have too many of them. An advanced reader's copy is a book that has yet to be published, that the publishers send out to people at libraries or bookstores for them to read so that they can kind of uptalk the book when it's coming. And my library has too many advanced reader's copies. Sorry, Christy, she doesn't have any. But if you have too much of something that's free to your library, if you have too much, ask your volunteers, say, hey, you want to go through all these books? If you're reading something, hey, you want to go through all these books, see, go through your ARCs, offer them to your volunteers first. Give them a sneak peek at what's happening. Privileges are your volunteers allowed in the library before you open? Are they allowed to have 15 minutes on Tuesday to kind of sneak through all the new materials that have come out? Are they allowed in the library after you close to do special genealogy research? Do they have special privileges? That's something you're going to have to consider in your plan. Then you can also do the special recognition, volunteer of the month, of the year, that kind of thing. Andrew says, actually that's Anne, under Andrew's name, says, when I was ill last year, they sent around a card, and it was signed by dozens of people that she volunteered with, and then it made her feel really good. That's something. We do a lot of cards at my library. For our volunteers. There's always a card behind some desk that we all sign for happy reasons and for not so happy reasons as well. Gift cards to volunteers around Christmas time, that's a great thing to do because it's just a little bit of appreciation, and it is so important. So maintaining communication is so important, as I just said. We need to let everyone at all times know what's going on and how to do it. If you get sick, someone needs to know how to handle these volunteers, how to know what they're doing. So have a team mentality. Make sure everyone knows what's going on and what to do if someone is sick. Have a backup and a backup. So you want to communicate to your volunteers. Are they best reached by phone? Are they email text savvy? Do you want to do periodical newsletters? Like, hey, we're going to feature a volunteer in this newsletter that deals with only volunteer stuff. We're going to feature a volunteer. We're going to talk about the different things that our volunteers are doing with home delivery, within CERC. We're going to talk about the projects that our volunteers have been working on. You can communicate with thank you notes, and then always make sure to tell them what to do if X, Y, and then Z happens. You're going to communicate to administration, to your supervisors, to the board. You're going to communicate statistics and newsletters, exciting projects, and feedback from recipients of service. If you get feedback from a service that your volunteer has done, you share that with the world. You make a big deal out of that. You share it with administration, the board, your supervisor. You share it with the volunteer. You share it on social media. You print it in the newspaper. Because that is the best kind of library PR, and it's going to make that volunteer feel good, and it's going to make the person who gave the compliment feel like they were really heard. So definitely share all of your communications. Respect and gratitude. So I want to talk about respect and gratitude real quickly because staff needs to know that volunteers are on the same team. An unrecognized volunteer, So if you're working at a public service desk and you're sharing responsibilities with another one of your teammates, oops, my slides just went crazy. So you are sharing responsibilities at this public service desk with a colleague of yours, and someone that you recognize as a library volunteer comes up and starts interacting with your colleague. Your colleague does not recognize them as a volunteer and therefore misunderstands the volunteer's question. The volunteer, unfortunately, gets miffed. The volunteer is understandably upset and ends up reporting to the library director. No bueno. This is not good. Because your library director doesn't want trouble. And so what you have to do is you have to make sure that your team knows that volunteer who they are. And you can do this through social media features like, hey, volunteer of the month. This is Darren, and he comes in and he helps us weed all of the books. Send out your thank you, your birthday, your anniversary notes. Do a bio of a volunteer in your library's newsletter. Give credit where it's due. Maybe offer them after hours access and those recognition breakfast, lunch, and dinners that we talked about. Make sure you honor their commitment. But unfortunately, even if you've gone through the job description, the application, the job interview, the training, the honoring of their commitment, sometimes it just doesn't work out. Not every dream is a nightmare, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. So what you really want to do is you want to have a plan and a backup plan. Prevention. The job description, the application, the interview, use it as a screening process so that you get the right person in the seat on that bus the first time. And then if it does go south, you have the option to kind of reassign them to another position. Or you can move them to a substitute position. Substitute volunteers are critical to step in as needed when a critical volunteer is not able to perform their duties on a specific day. You can also use the line, I'm so sorry. Things have changed and we may not have this volunteer position anymore. You could blame it on administration, your supervisor, the library board, because that usually is a pretty good tactic to just kind of say, I'm so sorry. Administration says that they've decided that we don't have this position anymore. And then you can always say, thank you so much for your interest, and then add them to your volunteer recognition. Put their name in the newsletter, this month so-and-so volunteered. Even if it didn't work out, make sure that you mention them and acknowledge them. And so these are some really great articles, these are some really great articles that I referenced, that I used when I was creating this presentation. I highly recommend going through these, and you can do that online. This is where those links come in. And then more links. The American Library Association has professional tips about using volunteers. And then OCLC.org has another webinar. But this one, of course, is superior. But if you need more or need another resource when it comes to things that you researched before building your volunteer program and that proposal that you're going to send to administration, here you go. Here's another link. And then some great further reading suggestions. I have not been able to get my hands on these yet. I have been waiting. Things are really slow here in Ohio. Our deliveries kind of non-existent. So get a hold of these. If you're thinking of investing in these for your library's professional collection, then I would definitely interlibrary loan them and see which one or ones suit your library's particular volunteer situation. It's going to be different for whatever reason you're having volunteers and your specific demographics. So definitely interlibrary loan these and see which ones fit. And everyone, I'm really proud of myself for staying inside my time limit, but we do have 2 minutes left. If there's anything that anyone wanted to add or anything that I need to elaborate on a little bit more, or any great ideas out there. And as always, if 2 days from now you're in the shower and you think, oh my gosh, that webinar, I forgot to ask Maggie this, you can always email me. My email is right here, maggierose520@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer questions, and if I don't have the answer, I can hopefully put you in touch with someone who does have the answer, or give you another resource that may be handy. But thanks, everyone. This was some really great interactions, and you guys are great, and doing what you do, working with volunteers is very much a tightrope. So keep up the good work, everyone.
Thanks, Maggie. Great presentation. And when you mention other webinars, I just want to say that there are quite a few of webinars about volunteers in the PCI archives, including at least one by me. So
well, definitely, like if Ann did it, then you guys should definitely.
There you go. Actually, I taught a course on it. I feel like I may have taught a graduate course in library school about it.
Well, there you go.
I did. The interesting thing is I did attend a webinar or a seminar about volunteering that was not directed at the library market, and it was interesting that we do cover it very well. So that's kind of fun.
Great.
I have 2 questions for you, Maggie, just in case.
Okay,
let's hope somebody else has some. Well, one was a comment. I get this from a nurse that actually helps me out. And she mentioned that she was at the hospital, not as a patient, but sitting waiting for her parent who was a patient. And the volunteer who was working in the surgery waiting room criticized the hospital, said nasty things about the hospital. And she was just shocked that she would criticize. And you mentioned that thing about volunteers, not talking about the dust behind the book truck, but that's another thing that they should always be talking up your institution rather than saying nasty things about it. Yes,
ambassadors, your volunteers are community ambassadors for the library.
And if it's that,
if it's a hospital volunteer, they should be a community ambassador for the hospital, and not, if they're unhappy with the institution they're volunteering for, then maybe they should rethink their motivation for volunteering.
Right. Or they should, if they have something, if they have criticisms of the organization, they should be giving them to their boss or whoever they volunteer with, rather than spreading it out to the public.
That's a great point. We've had a lot of our volunteers give us feedback on things that we can improve upon, and ideas for programming that they would like to see, and they're definitely worth listening to. It's really a team atmosphere that we're trying to create, where everyone's working together towards the same goals.
Could you say a little bit more, and maybe people in the audience have something to say, about unions and that tightrope you walk about volunteers not replacing regular employees, and what the unions really have to say about volunteers and that kind of thing?
So I used to work at a library where I've never worked at a library that had a union. So what I can tell you from my experience and from what I've read is that some libraries, and this is where you're going to talk to your administration, your supervisor, your admin, and in if you have a union, you're going to talk to your union rep. You're going to have that job description cleared by that union representative, so that everything is, copacetic and good to go and smooth. Because if your union approves the work that this volunteer is doing, then they're not going to give you trouble for it. A rule of thumb, the first public library that I worked at, they had a very strict rule that volunteers were not allowed to do any specific task that was in a job description for a paid employee. So that particular library paid shelvers, so our volunteers were not allowed to shelve. Story times were included in paid job descriptions, so our volunteers were not allowed to do story times. So what our volunteers did was a lot of our general office duties. It was a long time ago, so they generally ran a lot of copies. We do less copies now because everything's digital and we all have computers. But they would run copies for us. They would distribute memos for us. Run things up and down through the building. That kind of thing. So it did relieve staff, but they were prohibited from doing anything that a paid staff person was supposed to do according to their written job description. So that was one way that particular library got around with it. But it's definitely something, if you work with a union, you want to make sure that your union is okay with the type of work that you are asking your volunteers to do by just having them approve your job descriptions.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
That's a very fine line there, yeah. And then there's a comment or question from Colleen. If you have a volunteer that does do a decent job, but has a very sour grapes type of personality, any suggestions for dealing with the misfit? And let me comment on that before you actually say anything, Maggie. We had a very elderly woman that used to file cards for us, and it was just part of her personality. It's just the way she was. So it was hard to criticize her for being that way, but we just kept her out of the public eye. She filed cards in the back rather than going out front. But what are your suggestions, Maggie?
I would say the same thing. I would say try to find a position for this particular volunteer where they don't have to interact with the public. If they do a decent job, but they're sour grapes, maybe they're sour grapes because they want a better volunteer position. Maybe try giving them more recognition. Maybe take them on a tour through the building, or maybe just chat with them. Because Anne said, in her case, it was just their personality. Maybe just getting to know this volunteer a little bit better, you could find out if it is their personality or if there's something that's really wrong. Maybe they're having trouble dealing with another volunteer or a specific staff member, and you want to just keep them separated. So I would definitely, keep them away from the public and try to find a position that they're happier in.
Right. Oh. And you could do that.
She actually works alone. Well, in that case, sometimes you can't have your cake and eat it too. She's doing good work. She's working alone. Sour grapes personality might just be her thing, and such is life. Yep.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Because now we are seriously running over. Sorry about that. I don't see anything else that.
Okay.
And everyone is thanking you, Maggie. Thank you you did put a great deal of time into this. It was very well done.
Thank you. You guys are great. I had a wonderful time with this.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming and for your very active participation during this. It's really good to see everyone sharing and giving you great ideas. I think you guys come up with some ideas that are useful to the speakers, too. And I love it when a speaker stops and say, I have to write that one down. And I think we had a couple of those today. So thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Maggie. We hope to see everyone again soon at another PCI webinar. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.